There are so many things that go into creating a great podcast, and it's super easy to get hyper focused on the gear side of things, which is something that I am very guilty of because I love the gear side of things very, very much. But learning how to be a great host is one of the most important things you can do for your show. So, whether you're recording by yourself, working with a co host, or setting up interviews, let me show you a few simple things to keep in mind to help you become the host with the most. And let's start by focusing on you. There are so many variables that determine what makes a great podcast host, and every show is different, so, keep that in mind. But I want to give some general tips that apply to pretty much anyone. And the first thing to focus on, which I think is probably also one of the most important parts of being a great podcast host, is to put yourself in your listener's shoes. Think of being like a party host in real life. When you're planning things out and you're setting everything up, you're probably going to keep in mind what your guests like, who you invited, what they'll need, what expectations they might have, all that kind of stuff to ensure they have a great time. Being a good podcast host is exactly the same. You need to just think of what your listener will need to enjoy your show and get the most out of it. So, of course, there is a production side to that. You do want to make sure things sound as good as possible. And if you're doing a video podcast, you want to make sure they look as good as possible too. For this video, this is going to be a longer, in-depth video. I'm wanting to use a nice microphone placed close to me that, is running through a good interface so it sounds great. If I were just using my camera's built-in microphone like this for a long video like this, it wouldn't be a good listening experience. Even if the information is good, you wouldn't want to listen to this for a super long time. So listening to or watching your podcast should not be an uncomfortable experience for your listener. Take the time to learn how your equipment works, how to edit, how to process your audio a little bit to help your show sound its best. Nobody wants volume levels that are jumping all over the place. They have to keep turning things up or down. No one wants a mic that's, placed in the wrong spot so everything sounds terrible. No one wants EQ that makes everything sound garbled and distorted. As we're talking quickly about the production side of things, I did recently make a complete podcasting guide video if you want more help with that. So I wanted to touch on here saying the production side of things is important. You want things to look and sound their best. But now I do want to shift gears and focus on the less tangible aspects of podcast hosting beyond just the gear. When it comes to the actual content of your show, a good podcast host is always going to have their purpose in mind, and that's going to help the listener be content with your content. So basically, what do you want somebody to know, think, feel, or do after listening to your show, and what can you do to help them get to that point? Do you need to provide background information or context to make the topic more interesting or more accessible? Do you need to reference past episodes of your show so they don't just jump in the middle of like a series and not know what's happening? Do they need to go back to an older episode and start there? Everybody is unique, like I said before, and that uniqueness, the thing that makes you, you can't spell unique without you, that is what can make your show great. So, as I'm giving this advice, I don't want to give advice that's going to make everybody sound and act the same. But I do think there are a few universal things everybody can do to level up their hosting skills. For example, filler words are something that most people struggle with. It's a totally normal thing to use filler words. You don't need to eliminate them completely, but being aware of likes and ums and things like that will help your show totally flow much more clearly. And that doesn't mean that you need to spend hours and hours editing out every filler word from an episode, because that can also then make things sound too unnatural, and it can also just take up so much time. But you can go through your show after you've recorded and cut out any distracting or egregious uses of filler words if you feel like it's distracting. But personally, I think that rather than increasing your editing hours and your workload, I'd recommend just working to train yourself to speak with fewer filler words. It is a skill that you can learn. When I was a high school teacher, there was something I used to do with my senior students, which was encourage them to give impromptu 60-second speeches about anything. So they would have to stand up and just talk for 60 seconds without using any filler words. If they used a filler word, they got one chance to restart. And then if they use another filler word, they had to sit down and try it again the next day. The students could talk about whatever they wanted. So if there was something they knew about that they could share, they could talk about that. If they just wanted to look around the room and talk about whatever they were seeing, that was fine. They just couldn't use filler words. And it is surprisingly tough at first. But once you build up that skill and you can talk for a minute or two with little to no filler words, it really does improve the effectiveness of your overall message. And then once you start to notice filler words in others, you can't unnotice them. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse situation. But if you want to try this for yourself, you can work with a topic that you know a lot about, or you can just be in the room that you're in, set a timer, and just talk for 60 seconds. Look at what you see. There's a camera on a tripod over here, and it looks like it has a 50mm lens. This camera is on a different stand that extends up, and there's a teleprompter on it. There's a microphone on that camera, but it's not plugged in right now because this is the microphone that's being used. Something as simple as that can really help you improve the way that you communicate and don't use filler words and get more comfortable with silence. Because one of the big reasons that we use filler words, especially in the English-speaking Western part of the world, is because we're very uncomfortable with silence. We worry oftentimes that if we're quiet for too long in a conversation, somebody else is going to either stop paying attention or jump in and take over the conversation. This usually isn't actually true, but it's just kind of how we've been trained growing up and throughout our lives and culturally. So we try to fill as much space as possible, even if our brains don't have anything ready to say yet. And that's oftentimes where filler words can come into place. But especially when it comes to podcasting, the person listening to or watching your show, they've already actively chosen to check out your podcast. So you don't need to be scared of a little bit of silence. That means that instead of using filler words, which are essentially saying, wait, I'm still gathering my thoughts, but I'm not done talking, but please don't leave. I don't want you to leave. Try just being quiet for a beat or two. And then pick up where you left off. Oftentimes that silence is nowhere near as long and distracting. That little pause right there, to me, kind of felt like an eternity. It's like, oh man, people are gonna get bored, turn off this video. But to you watching, it probably was a lot less, probably didn't take up nearly as much time. Leaving in pauses like that can help you gather your thoughts. It can help things be more clear for your listener because you're not cluttering them up with filler words. And it can even help improve the pacing and even make transitions in your show a bit more smooth because you're not using filler words. You're just letting silence do the work for you. And speaking of becoming a great podcast host, every host needs a hosting platform for their podcast, so thank you to Buzzsprout for sponsoring this video. I've been using Buzzsprout to host my own podcasts for over 5 years at this point, and it is genuinely one of the easiest and most reliable ways to run a podcast. Just drag, drop, publish your episodes. Buzzsprout will take care of everything else. They make it super easy to get your show listed in all of the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Buzzsprout has also added a ton of new features to help your show grow and to help you connect with your audience. Their listener support feature lets fans contribute monthly, and Buzzsprout subscriptions give you a way to offer bonus episodes, early access, or ad-free content to your most dedicated listeners. You've also got awesome things like visual sound bites and embedded players for easy sharing. Even on my own personal website, I just have all of my podcasts with their most recent episodes embedded directly in the website so people can listen right there if they want to. And of course, you get detailed analytics so you can see how your episodes are performing and where your listeners are coming from. And beyond hosting, Buzzsprout is a huge resource for podcasters at every level with free guides, an awesome YouTube channel full of helpful videos, and even the Buzzcast podcast. So that means whether you're just starting out or you've been podcasting for a while and you're looking to refine your workflow, Buzzsprout has everything you need to not only start podcasting, but keep podcasting. And of course, because the entire team behind Buzzsprout is made up of people who are passionate about podcasting, you also get incredible customer support that will be there to help you if you ever need it at any time in your podcasting journey. So thank you again to Buzzsprout for sponsoring this video. And if you think that Buzzsprout will be a good fit to host your show, be sure to check out the link in the description. And now that we've talked about a few things you can do to hone your individual hosting skills and your podcast hosting platform, let's talk about other people. Not in a gossipy way, but in a how you can help them as a podcast host kind of way. Because remember that party metaphor from earlier? Working with other people, either in person or remotely, is also a place where you really get to put those kinds of hosting skills to the test. They can be your guest. I feel like there's a whole song about this somewhere in pop culture. So let's start with some of the in-person basics for podcast hosting, beginning with just making sure people feel comfortable. This sounds super basic, and it is, but it's so easy to overlook. So whether someone is a co-host that you work with a lot or a guest that's only on your show one time, don't just pull somebody into a room and start bombarding them with questions or conversations while they have really no idea what's going on or where they are. I know it sounds ridiculous to do that, but it happens all the time, especially when things get busy and schedules are tight and recording time is limited. It's easy to just kind of think that you just need to get someone sitting down, throw a microphone in front of them, and get the show done. But that is probably not going to help the guest be their best on your show. So be sure that anyone you're recording with is taken care of. Check that they're comfortable. They're physically comfortable. They've had water. They've had snacks if they need it. They've used the restroom if they need to. And then they're ready to sit down and record comfortably, confidently. Basically, all the same things you would do anytime someone visits your house or your home and you want them to feel comfortable, do the same thing with guests or co-hosts on your podcasts. And this is because when people aren't distracted by physical or even emotional discomfort, it's easier to be in the moment. So then when you're recording with them on your episode, it's so much easier to create the best episode possible because both of you can be in the moment, can be present, and can have awesome conversations and discussions. And this really just comes down in so many ways to being a considerate person, the same way that you need to put yourself in your listener's shoes, put yourself in your guest or your co-host shoes, be aware of their time. If you're recording an hour-long episode, say from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., don't tell the person to show up at 10 a.m. and then you think that you're going to start recording at 10:01 because it's going to be way too chaotic and way too frustrating. But by the same token, don't tell them to show up at 8 a.m. where then they just have to sit around for 2 hours before you actually start recording. You probably don't need to take up that much of their time. You can send questions, outlines, any other relevant info beforehand so that your guest knows what to expect, and that can also help you save a ton of time on the actual day of recording. In general, I think about 15 to 20 minutes is a sweet spot to ask someone to arrive before recording because it's usually enough time for them to get there, to get comfortable, to do a mic check. You're not taking up too much extra of their time, and you're also not asking them to show up 1 or 2 minutes before recording and confusing them and bombarding them. And even though you do need to do a mic check with someone when you're recording with them, be sure that you've already set up your equipment and tested everything before they arrive, because few things are more uncomfortable and awkward than showing up to record something only to watch somebody struggle with their equipment for, who knows how much time and start getting frustrated and cursing at their microphone because they forgot that a mute button was turned on or they didn't format a memory card properly or something like that. Never make it a chore for somebody to be on your show. So do your best to accommodate their schedule and be respectful of their time. It's just good manners, right? It's just good manners. And speaking of manners, oh man, as someone who's been on both sides of the podcast interview table, I've seen all manner of hosting etiquette. I've seen some great examples of interview etiquette where the host just, they should be a full-time professional podcast host because they're so professional. And I've also seen some examples of really bad interview etiquette or just total lack thereof. So with that in mind, here are a few other things to keep in mind during interviews and conversations. Whether you'll be recording in person or remotely, you want to make sure that the other person does not have any questions about how things are going to work. You don't want to ask them a question in your show and then they just look confused because they don't understand if you can hear them. Are they supposed to be recording? What's happening? It's a very good idea in advance to double confirm the date and time that you're recording and the method that you're recording. Does somebody need to show up in person? If so, don't have them think that it's a remote interview and then they're not physically there when they're supposed to be there. If you're recording remotely, don't give someone the impression they need to show up physically. Do you need to share links? If you're using something like Ecamm or Riverside or whatever to record your show, do you need the proper links? Do you need to double check that they have a microphone or a webcam or any other equipment to help them look and sound their best? Any other additional, technical production information, be sure to send that early. Anything you can do to help somebody feel comfortable is going to make the show better. That way, again, they can focus on the conversation without feeling confused and overwhelmed by just the whole experience. And those reminders are helpful, especially if you schedule something in advance. If you book something weeks or even months in advance, it's easy to forget about that. So it's a good idea 24 to 48 hours before your time of recording to send a quick email or a message, just double checking and confirming that everything is ready to go for your actual show. So now in theory, you should have everybody comfortable, ready to record, everything's up and running. What do you need to do to host a great interview? This is another one of those things that is a skill you will develop over time. It can sometimes also be tricky if you're interviewing somebody who's regularly on other podcasts and other shows. I have found myself in those situations debating on whether or not I want to listen to those other interviews or watch those shows because I don't really want to be influenced by what somebody else has already done. But at the same time, I'm worried about just repeating myself. So you kind of got to use your own judgment on how much you want to consume of your guest being a guest on other people's shows, because you probably also don't want to just recreate the same interviews over and over again by inadvertently asking the same questions, but you don't want somebody else's style to overrun your style. So it's a very individual level of comfort kind of thing. It's a case-by-case basis. There's no right or wrong answer. Just know it's a good idea to be aware of whether or not the person you're recording with is regularly on other shows or not. And if they are, some things they might have already talked about, several different times over. If you find yourself in a situation where you're interviewing someone who's well known enough to have fans and a following, it's important to keep in mind that those fans are probably already going to have heard a lot of the most common stories that get told in every interview. So that means if you can bring something new out of that person, it's going to be really valuable for you. It's going to be valuable for that person because they're going to get to veer off the course that they're normally stuck on during interviews, and it's going to be really exciting for the people who follow them. So if you're interviewing a really well-known person, you can take that as an opportunity to do something a little bit different and bring out some new information that no one's ever really heard before or that they haven't gotten to share before. And that means that a bit of research can really go a long way when prepping for an interview. Background research will, of course, depend on who you're interviewing. If it's someone that is well known, it'll be easy to find information on them. If it's someone that you just know personally or you're already familiar with, you might already have a ton of knowledge built up about them in your mind. If it's someone who's not well known, it's going to be a little bit trickier to find out information about them. You might need to do pre-screening questions or something like that. It is important to note, though, not everybody has time for that. So if someone has agreed to be on your show, you don't necessarily want to just give them a bunch of homework assignments until the recording date. If you do send out pre-interview questions or requests for information or something like that, just be sure that it doesn't feel like an obligation for the person and they know that it's something that can just supplement the experience, but it's not necessarily required for it. And a bit of warning, especially if you are working with people who aren't used to being interviewed a lot, sometimes people can take these pre-interview questions really seriously, and they will write out long answers to them. And then if you ask that question or a similar question during the show, they almost go back to exactly what they wrote, almost in a scripted kind of way, because they feel like that is the correct answer to the question, and it can really derail the natural feel of a conversation. I think for the most part, you usually want your interview to feel like it's just two people having a conversation, and there happens to be a camera and a microphone in the room. You don't want it to feel like this very stiff, stilted, scripted thing. Now, one of the reasons you want to do research on your guest is because you want to have background information so you can make the interview interesting. Now, it's important to then take that and contextualize the person for your audience. Don't just keep all that information to yourself. Your audience doesn't want to just tune in and listen to a random person that they have no idea who the person is, why they should listen to them, why they matter at all. Taking a bit of time to contextualize your guest for your audience is going to make things so much better for anyone. And this could mean that just before the interview segment starts, you record a separate introduction where you talk about who the person is, how you set up the interview, all that kind of stuff. Maybe after the interview, you decide to go back and record something else, a supplemental thing, or even contextualize bits of the interview. There are a bunch of different ways to approach contextualizing your guest. What you really don't want to do is just have the audience feel like they're thrown in the middle of a conversation with someone that they have no clue who the person is. Now, when it comes to your actual interview questions, be sure that you're asking them in a way that encourages a longer responses. This means that who, what, where, when, why, how, those kinds of questions, those journalistic questions, are really good to use in your interviews. Avoid yes or no questions at all costs for the most part, because if you just ask someone a yes or no question, it's so uninteresting. If you're interviewing an athlete and you're like, "Oh, you won the championship. Was that super exciting?" And they go, "Yeah." That's not an interesting interview. Nobody wants to listen to that. So instead, you might want to say something like, "You led your team to a victory in the championship last year. How did it feel when that finally happened?" And then because you used a how question and you talked about feelings too, you then encourage them to share a bit more from their perspective and a bit more about their experience. You're going to get a lot more than just a one-word answer. It's more than likely when you're recording your podcast that you and your guest want the episode to be good. You obviously want to create the best show possible, and your guest probably doesn't want to be known as like the worst guest on a show or a boring guest or anything like that. So you can, before doing your interview, also remind them to try and avoid yes or no questions. Sometimes people get nervous when they're recording, and that's just sort of their default, is to sort of be quick and succinct. But if you remind them, like, give us information, feel free to go on some tangents. We want to have a conversation. If a question reminds you of something else, feel free to follow that, and then we'll kind of take it from there. We want this to be a natural discussion, not just yes or no interrogation answers. So this probably means that before your interview, you've created some questions. You've written out a list of the best questions you could possibly ask, and it's to make the best interview ever. And that is awesome. And it's a great tool to have. And it might be something where you go through every one of those things. But I also like to remind people that they do not need to feel like they're married to their list of interview questions. So for example, if you ask someone a question like, "Hey, last year I heard that you went on a trip to an exotic country. What was that like?" And then they launch into this whole thing where they tell you, "Oh my gosh, it was supposed to be this relaxing anniversary vacation, but right away we were captured by pirates on the seas and we feared for our lives. But it turns out the pirates weren't even really pirates. They were Broadway actors doing a method practice to prepare for an upcoming pirate musical performance. And so we all became friends and we were going to get cast in the musical. But at that point, the ship was taken over by a storm and shipwrecked, and the only way we made it back to civilization was by befriending a group of gorillas that carried us on their backs to the nearest village. And then you say, cool, I heard that pizza has been your favorite food since childhood. Do you like pineapple on pizza? That is just going to kill all interest and momentum in your interview. Do not feel like you need to stick to your questions. If something better pops up, if they give this amazing answer, or they tell an interesting story, or something that you didn't expect, or you even just find yourself coming up with better questions, more interesting things, or being curious about something, it's okay to set your list of predetermined questions aside and just follow the thread of what feels natural, because that is really where you can pull out some of the best and the most unique and the most organic things from your guest. And that means even if you never get through your full list of interview questions, it's totally okay, because what you end up with could be so much better than anything you could have actually planned by yourself. So use your questions as a guide, but don't necessarily let them dictate the entire interview. It is, remember, your podcast. You're the one that's in charge. And as with most things, becoming a good interviewer, it's a skill. It just takes a bit of practice. And so over time, you'll kind of develop a sense for when you should stick to your specific list, keep things really on topic, and when you can kind of go and follow these unique threads that pop up. And sometimes, it depends on the guest too. Sometimes you're going to have a connection with someone where it feels like you could just talk for hours and hours and the show just flies by. Other times it's going to feel like you're trying to squeeze something interesting out of a rock, and it's like you feel like I've gone through all my questions and we are 10 minutes into a 60-minute episode. It just happens. It's entirely normal. And again, it's one of those things that just gets easier and easier as time goes on. So just like riding a bike or playing an instrument, all of this stuff is going to feel unnatural at first, and you might not be or feel that you're as good as you would like to be in the beginning. But with time and practice, anybody can become an incredible podcast host. So I know that we've covered a lot, but after more than 10 years of podcasting myself, I really do believe that these are some simple and effective tips to help you become a host that will make others boast about your skills. And speaking of boasting, I would like to boast about everyone who helps support the channel through YouTube channel memberships. And if you do want to learn more about the entire podcasting process, I do have my complete simple podcasting guide video right here.